Hill and Fort Lee. And present tonight is Mr. David Kalita, who's the Deputy to the Chief of Transportation. He's from Fort Lee. He has several of his contingent with him to discuss this issue and address any questions that the board may have. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Kalita at this time.
Mr. Kalita, welcome. We appreciate you coming in and sharing with the board. We read some things in the newspaper, and we appreciate the opportunity that you come and share with the board with your intent from Fort Lee.
Sir, I've also read some things in the newspaper. Sir, thank you very much for the invitation. On behalf of Brigadier General Edward Dorman, the Army Chief of Transportation, we appreciate being here and having an opportunity to speak with you. My purpose here is to inform you of our status for the rail initiative and what we need to do from this point on. You have a slide deck in front of you that depicts an image of what a train might look like once our recruiting command gets a hold of it and puts a little paint on it or something. The first item you see there is how we framed the problem statement for moving troops, soldiers that are in a student status between Fort Lee and Fort A.P. Hill, because we do significant training at Fort A.P. Hill. And the critical decision point in the process is safety. The next slide, sir, indicates why we are changing our mode of operations, which has always been by highway from this point, but we see a need to change to rail, or desire to change to rail, given the increased risk of the additional soldiers that are going to be placed en route along the way. We're doing a monthly exercise with about 200 soldiers with the effects of the BRAC, base realignment and closure activities on Fort Lee. That's probably going to look more like 3 exercises a month with 800 soldiers or so at a time. Next slide, sir, is safety statistics. So we took what was available to us through the Department of Motor Vehicles, through the Federal Railway, and we assessed what the safety statistics looked like for movement on the road and movement on the highway. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see what has turned out as our proposed solution, which was to engage with a rail transport operation, a government-owned, contractor-operated rail. Of course, contractor-operated really means Amtrak. They are the nation's federal passenger train operator. And we can do this with 2 or 3 locomotives and 10 passenger cars, 2 locomotives on the train at any one time. And then we would have to conduct a local haul, a transfer from Milford area into Fort A.P. Hill. There's no rail spur at Fort A.P. Hill, so Caroline County vicinity Milford is our most likely northern terminus rail destination. The next slide is simply some more precise crash data from the highway. Next slide being a couple of pictures documented U.S. Army accidents on I-295. A couple of accidents over a couple of years, not bad as far as safety statistics are concerned, but still quite undesirable for the Army, and we want to avoid the potential for future damage to government property and, of course, any potential risk to soldiers and civilians on the highway. The next slide, sir, is a concept of operations. And very simply, we will maintain the train on Fort Lee. We will operate the train in a one-way direction to a northern terminus, park the train there for the duration of training, the 4 or 5 days that will encompass that training at Fort A.P. Hill, then board the train again and return to Fort Lee. Next slide, sir. What that requires for us is a northern terminus, a railhead in the vicinity of Milford, where we can detrain and transfer those soldiers to buses for local haul to Fort A.P. Hill. So we're going to need a controlled environment with a very brief logger period in order to move those soldiers. We will need buses, we'll contract buses so that we can do a local haul loop of those soldiers from the railhead to Fort A.P. Hill and back. So we have to establish the conditions for that operation, which by what we've seen includes we need to lay in a new rail spur at a designated location. We need to apply some physical security measures to that site, fence it in. And obviously, we are interested in a minimal impact to the community. The next slide, sir, is an overhead shot that helped us orient ourselves to the map as we were doing a reconnaissance of most likely areas where we can put in a rail spur or operate from. And we are at the decision at this point in time, and we seek assistance from Caroline County in deciding what is the most appropriate location for us to operate from. The acquisition of the train has proceeded positively, and the only thing now that is preventing an actual signature to the document for acquiring the train is inspection of the rolling stock and the locomotives themselves. So once the inspection is conducted, which should be this month, and everything is found to be favorable, the Army will in fact procure the train. And it will take us a couple of months to enter into an operating agreement with Amtrak, lay in a rail spur at a designated location, and then operate our movement via train rather than highway. Sir, are there any questions?
Yes, sir. We appreciate you coming in again and taking the opportunity to give us the time to take the questions. Mr. Popovich, do you have questions at this point?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Akers.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I do not.
All right, Mr. Seeley.
You showed us a number of sites in the Milford area in the overhead views. I guess I'm a little curious how you'll do the down select on which of these facilities would best suit your needs, and when you might think you might start down that process.
Sir, we have begun with that process, and we believe we have what is the best course of action for us in the Desjarnet lumber site. But we want to develop an informed decision based on the county's interests and what the county would like to see as well. The lumber site provides us with what we believe to be the safest operating parameters regarding ingress, egress, traffic patterns, and a space that has minimal impact on anything around it and is minimally impacted by anything around it. For instance, dangerous locations. Relatively easy to lay a rail spur in there, easy to fence, and provides what we think is the best opportunity for that purpose.
I guess one of my concerns is you're going to have a lot of folks there, and you're going to need some sort of restroom facilities and that kind of stuff. At least I think you will. I don't know. And I guess I don't know if you realize how wet that whole area is and what sorts of issues that can present.
Yes, sir. We might have 500, 800 soldiers at a time. Now, there will be, on the train cars, latrine facilities. And certainly, we may have a potential to engage in a contract for portage-on services on that site if necessary. I don't know if we do have a proper recognition, if there is some grade issues or issues of standing water or things of that in that nature. From what we've seen at this point in time, things look preferable to us. Obviously, though, as I'm saying, we would like to get some guidance from the county. We've not taken any action up our chain of command yet for purposes of decision-making at this point in time. And that's one reason that brings us here to see you.
Those are just my concerns about knowing that particular area, is that it is, some of it is in the 100-year floodplain. Mr. Fincham could answer. I mean, I think that's one of those things we need to look at so that nobody gets into something and goes, we didn't realize this was the situation here.
Also, we recognize that weather and conditions do affect training, and if conditions are such that we have a 100-year flood activity or things of that nature, we're probably canceling training anyhow because of other effects associated with that. So we do recognize, consistent with other activities, the potential curtailment of training.
Those are my questions for now, Mr. Rosell.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Seeley. Mr. Vice Chairman?
Thank you. Mr. Coletta, you kind of answered the question I was going to ask with Mr. Seeley, and you said your best choice was DeJarna and Beale. Let me frame it a different way. If this were an actual theater of operation, you can put it wherever you wanted to put it. Where would you put it?
You're exactly correct. Within all legal opportunities, we would take what we wanted.
That's the Army way, isn't it?
Yes, sir, and build what we wanted if it was not available otherwise. Of course, we can't build what we want. We have no desire to do that, and we have a very minimum amount of money that we can apply to the project. We have the opportunity to use state funds for the purpose of industrial access for laying in a rail spur, and so that is very beneficial for us. For what we had looked at, those 5 locations specifically that are on that photograph, that was our number 1 location. That was our choice to operate from, was the lumber company.
Okay.
We did not extend our reconnaissance to any other locations that would allow me to indicate that something would be more preferable.
Okay. Well, that was kind of one. If you really wanted to, like the Army would do, where would you put it? The other question is,
if I may, sir, I think the ultimate answer to that would be we'd expend federal funds to create a rail spur on Fort A.P. Hill, but of course we have no authority to do that at this point in time.
okay, and I just want to understand if it were theater, what you would do,
Sir.
just because that kind of gives me a little perspective on where we stand. Had you considered Carmel Church at all as an option?
Sir, I believe that is new to me. I believe our answer is no. Ron?
Sir,
Yes, sir.
the Milford site is about the closest that there is to going into A.P. Hill.
Mhm.
One reason for there. If I may add on to what Mr. Kalita said, the lumberyard site also has a CSX spur right there.
Right there already.
That is seldom used by CSX.
Right.
So that spur by itself has potential to be used for this operation. And the only thing that would be required at the lumberyard would be an offload type facility. That's the proximity of Milford to A.P. Hill and the existence of the rail spurs that are already there. If you get to the other side of the crossway there, down to the other side where the other industries are, I believe it's Industry Drive, and we have looked at that. You have a propane plant, you
Right.
have a chlorine plant, et cetera, so that there are some other hazards to the Army in that particular area, and we're concerned about those as well as safety on the highway.
Okay. And you know, along that same line, as far as safety is concerned, that's, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I completely answered your question. Carmel Church, on the other hand, you know, this is not a bring the train up, the passengers come off at a station, and then the train goes on. We're also looking at an area where that train could park for 4 or 5 days. And Carmel Church doesn't seem to suit itself for that particular aspect too. It's more into a normal passenger line operation.
Yeah, it's kind of a more, I guess, throughput or whatever, but
Yes.
but if you're considering a spur, maybe the spur could work, and I say that because the county just recently looked at a development in that area where rail was a possibility, so there might be some sort of synergy with that particular developer and maybe the Army, and it could be kind of a win-win. But that's one thing. The other thing that you'll have to consider, which is kind of why I was thinking that way, is if I'm driving 5 or 10 buses through Milford, I don't know if you've gone that way or tried to go that way, but there's quite a few little sharp turns in there and the road's fairly narrow. So then we may have some impact on the citizenry here, and possibly in Carmel Church, you're on Route 1, you're on 207, it's 4 lanes all the way. It may be a little better, it's 6 or 7 miles longer possibly.
Yes, sir.
So, I just want us to consider all those things.
Absolutely, sir. We do want to reach a decision point as soon as possible, and we want to do this in coordination with the county.
Okay. And I appreciate not being in the theater, so thank you very much for that. And the last one was, there should be no county resources impacted. I'm not going to have to send the sheriff out there and do traffic control. The MPs are going to do it all?
We've not developed the plan to that detail at this point in time. And I do not know the authority of the military police operating on Fort A.P. Hill to engage in activities on public land.
Right. And that's kind of, minor concern is, I'm old enough to have seen the National Guard in places where it shouldn't be. And my concern would be that same sort of perception with the MPs directing traffic there and people going through, and there's all sorts of concerns.
Yes, sir.
Because whenever I see a military roadblock, I think something's really wrong.
Yes, sir.
And it may be something different. So it may be a little easier if you're at a different location. Since you asked, I'm just trying to tell you what my concerns are and
Very good.
ways we can
Appreciate
work
that, sir.
together.
And we can work out those details with the county as well to
Okay.
ensure we're operating within your guidance and desires.
Okay, and the last thing is you have to make this decision by when?
Sir, we have no date that we're up against at this point in time. We believe we will begin to gain possession of the rolling stock and locomotives in February or March, and we would like to be able to begin operations not long after that.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, and lastly, just the, typically, what days and hours of operations would you anticipate this?
Yes, sir. They are not specifically set. They can vary somewhat, but a Sunday up and maybe what was our timeline on here, Ron?
There's a Sunday up and a
Sunday up and a
Yeah.
Thursday back.
most likely in some period in the afternoon on Sunday, and then probably late afternoon on Thursday back. And the times will most likely vary for a couple of reasons. One will be where we get the window for track usage up from CSX, but more importantly, we will look for a variable window for security reasons. When you're taking an Army train up and down there, it's still, we don't want to say that we pass this section at this time every Sunday.
Okay. All right, and I think Mr. Seeley has one last question. And
You brought up the CXS issue that I was kind of curious about. I know that, the commuter rail has had a difficult time negotiating time on track for their trains. And I'm curious on how all those negotiations have gone up to this point and where they are in their decision process.
We have had preliminary discussions with CSX some time back, and they have recommended the afternoon windows that we are discussing. Their most frequent use of trackage is in the evening for their freight traffic. In addition to that, by using Amtrak, and Amtrak is the operator, Amtrak has an existing agreement with CSX for trackage rights on CSX tracks. And it will come from the Army schedule to Amtrak to CSX to negotiate the times for travel. And then back to us, and our ultimate travel time will be based on the CSX Amtrak negotiation.
Okay, thank you.
And for them, it's a non-revenue train, so we'll be subject really to their scheduling.
All right, sir.
Sir,
Thank you so
very
much, and we appreciate the update, and we'll keep in touch. Okay, board members, you'd like about a 5-minute break?
Okay.
You good to go?
I'll take it.
All right.
I'm good.
All right, we'll take about a 5-minute break. The Board of Supervisors meeting, and next presentation will be the presentation from Fred Transit. And is Kathy back? Will you be making your
He is?
presentation this evening?
My name is Kathy Beck. I'm the Director of Public Transit for Fredericksburg Regional Transit. In your packets, you have the information about our fiscal year 2010-11 funding. If you have any questions, we're here to answer them. I'm here with Arnold Levine, who's our Manager of Policy and Compliance.
Okay. All right, we certainly appreciate you coming in, and we know that we originally had budgeted $101,000, $329,000 from your original request, and we did budget $53,000 for our local contributions, which kind of puts us at the point where, you know, by the end of the year, we have to decide, you know, what action was best for Caroline.
Right.
And we do appreciate, again, you guys being here to discuss that. But I guess with the numbers that we have now, the amount of trips that we have, what is 332?
I'm sorry?
With the amount of trips that we have for our ridership for Caroline, the monthly ridership reports, we have 332 per month.
No, you had 332 last month.
Okay,
Month of
and then,
October.
so it's about 4,000 a year? Is that, would that be about,
Actually, last year, in calendar year 2009, there was 8,244 trips.
okay. And what does a trip represent?
A trip represents a boarding. So in other words, you could have two people, they go on, that counts as a trip, they get onto another bus, that counts as a trip.
Okay. So what is the average cost for a rural county normally per trip? Which is in general, what is a kind of way you have to look at the point where sometimes I guess you get to the point of no return, but, you know, when is the investment, you know, a good investment as far as per trip cost? Would you ever take a stab at that?
Well, only you can make that determination. It costs 50 cents to board a Fred bus. It costs us about $60 an hour to run a bus. If in an hour's time, on average, we're carrying 5 people in the county, or let's be generous, let's make it a round number so we can do the math. We carry 10 people in the county. We've generated $5 worth of revenue. That means that the county, the state, and the federal government are picking up the tab for the other $55 an hour. So the actual cost per trip in the county is very high. It was high when we were carrying 8,000 people a year. It's even higher when we carry 7,000 people a year. And it's basically your judgment as to whether it's worth it to the county to provide the local assistance to offset the costs of running the bus. I don't have the exact number in my head as to what the subsidy per trip is, but it's probably staggering if we were to have that number. $20, $30 a trip, it's very high.
Okay, and I just want to make sure you don't get me wrong, because you know, the relationship that we've had with Fred over the years it's been a good relationship, and you guys have, you know, always served us how we asked to be served. So I want to make sure there's clear that there's no problems with the relationship, because I think you guys have served us very well. I think what we're looking at is, you know, what can we tried this for a while. Now, what can we continue, you know, to do? What makes sense? So with that being said, I'd open up to questions to other board members, okay? And if you guys have additional questions, please feel free to ask them this time. Mr. Popowitz.
Mr. Chairman, I think you asked the Golden question there right off the bat, so that was the question I had as well.
All right. Mr. Akers.
How long have we been partnering with Fred on this ridership program? How long has it been?
It's been since 2002.
8 years. Yeah, I look at the fact that we've been in this program since 2002, as you've said, so basically 8 years that we've been involved in it. King George just probably came on board in the last 12 months or 18 months?
No, King George came to Fred in 2005.
Okay, 5 years. And they have 4 times the ridership last month than what we do, and
Right.
we've been in the program longer. So, you know, evidently, when we went to Fred and asked Fred to come into the county, we may have been ahead of our time to do that, and it has not panned out. I know in Ladysmith, to be honest with you, I thought that the ridership in Ladysmith would be much higher with the developments there, and I thought people would take advantage of being able to catch a bus rather than getting in that automobile and driving to Fredericksburg. They could catch the bus at the Food Line or to Lake Landor entrance and go to Fredericksburg and come back. It just hasn't happened. In Ladysmith, you probably don't have over, 4 or 5 riders. I'm not sure you've had that many a day.
Right, and
You have that many a week.
And the reason, well, a few of the reasons are because the service is limited.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, obviously, if you put, 5 buses on and, it was every 15 minutes or half hour, people would tend to ride more. But, you can't do the investment if no one's riding even on this, when it's thin.
I understand completely. And I think that if we had something that maybe traveled Route 1 rather than, people in Ladysmith having to go to Carmel Church, then to Bowling Green, then to Fredericksburg, and then that route back home in Ladysmith, it certainly creates a problem. And we only had 332 riders last month. King George had 1,258 riders last month. I just don't know how long we can continue to, and it's costing us over $101,000 a year. And the reason you're here tonight is to say if we don't pay that additional $48,000, then you'll have to cease service in the county. And I understand where you're coming from, but I don't know that it's feasible to pay the $48,000 extra at this point.
Oh, and we totally understand that. I just want to caution, if you do cease service, that the federal and the state government frowns on that, and it will be extremely difficult to start service back up. So just know that.
I understand. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Seeley?
I think she answered my question is if we stop, then we're basically out of the system and out of the service. And I don't have a good answer either at this point. I was surprised at the ridership and the numbers. I thought it was higher than that. I was fairly surprised. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Mr. Vice Chairman?
Yes, sir. Mr. Levine wanted to add something?
I was just going to say, with respect to ridership, this year has been down across the system, and we can only use our best judgment as to why. Part of it is that the economy is still hurting, and a lot of our ridership is people getting back and forth to work, and if there's no work, they're not riding, and if they're not working, they're not buying, so they're also not riding the buses to get to shopping centers and other places to spend money, and that is something that we've experienced across the system, I think more significantly in Caroline County than probably any other jurisdiction.
Well, Mr. Levine, you probably, or you may not recall the last time you were here when we had quite a few folks that were questioning the change in service and change in schedules. And that's kind of my concern is a lot of those people were using Fred to go to work. And, you know, living in rural county, if you don't have your own car, you're probably gonna have a hard time getting employment. And from my perspective, that people that we're employing or people that are employed and depend on Fred to get to and from, purely Freudian, but depending on getting to and from work, you know, now we're going to cut them out. They're not going to work. It actually could cost the county. Mrs. Green is here with social services. Those people who aren't working, it could cost us more. Now, you don't necessarily have a questionnaire when you get on board saying, are you going to work or are you going to shop? So I can't tell. You do?
Well, we just completed a survey after we did our trans development plan, and I believe it was about 40% or 38% of our riders take Fred to and from work.
Okay, but not specifically for Caroline.
No.
That's the whole system.
That's a system.
Right, that's
Yeah,
the
because
system.
I think in Caroline it's probably a lot higher. I mean, I'm not going to take personally Fred to go to the mall, Spotsylvania Mall. I'm going to go ride with a friend. But if I got to be at Pilot at 6 o'clock in the morning or 7, Fred is what I have to use. So I don't want to see us stop it because I think a lot of those people, even if it's 332, are going to work. And I believe if people are working, we should keep them working because that keeps us all going. So there's got to be some sort of way we can work together to make this happen. And that's my perspective.
Okay, well, certainly, I guess where we are at the end of the year, we've used our allotment by end of,
Well, with respect to the question of timing, we need to know not later than December 1st what your decision will be, because there are notification requirements that we have to make 45 days. And by our calculation, the money basically runs out by the middle of January, unless it's supplemented in some fashion. So by December 1st, we need to know whether there will be additional funding, and if so, how much. And we also would like to have time to be able to review your decision and determine whether a basic threshold of service can be retained in the county for the remainder of the fiscal year. Let's be frank with you. There comes a point when it doesn't make any sense for us to be running 22 passenger buses 90% empty over Caroline County roadways. And we believe that we are basically providing the most minimal service that we can to move people between key destinations in the county. And if we can't maintain that, then there's also a decision on Fred's side as to whether there's a critical mass of operations out here that serves you best. It doesn't serve you to sustain a Fred overhead that you might not have with another provider if you decide to go that way. You know, we value the partnership we've had with the county for the better part of a decade, and we'd love to continue serving, but there is a level at which it just doesn't make sense for you to be hiring us to do it, perhaps versus finding some other solution to take people on the trips that they have to make. So December 1st is a key date for us to be able to follow all the procedural rules that we have to with respect to federal and state requirements.
how would you think would be the best way for us to approach, you're looking at a reduced scheduling compared to what we have? What would be the best way to look at another alternative?
You mean another provider or just different
No.
service in the county?
Just, maybe we just have too many bus schedules now, and maybe we can reduce them to the ones who have the most ridership, and just looking at some priorities. And
I don't think anybody who would look at your service out here would say you've got too much service. The least used route is the C2, which operates Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. 2 days, Monday and Friday to Dawn, and Wednesday to Port Royal. If you were looking to amputate one of the arms, that's the one we would look at first. I know it's harsh to say for those people who use those routes, but if you're trying to save some semblance of reasonable service, I think that's where you would look first, and then come back to the C1, which is 5 days a week, 12 or 13 hours a day, and look at that. But I want to come back to the point I made, which is that from our perspective, it may make no sense for us to come all the way out here to provide significantly less service than we're providing right now.
Mr. Chairman, I do know that there are probably a couple of other private providers in the county. They have 10, 15 passenger vans. And to be honest, that's probably more what we need than we do the 22-seater that only has 5 people or 3 people riding on it around the circuit. But I'm just wondering if Fred could, over the next several weeks, let us know where they pick up people that are going to work the most. I'm the same as Mr. Thomas. I certainly don't want to let those people that are trying to work and trying to provide for their families, I don't want to take away their only source of transportation, basically to get to and fro work. But I think we can do it more economical and maybe better than what we're doing it now for those few people. So I'm just wondering if you could take surveys, if it's possible, over the next several weeks as people get on to determine where they're going from and to. There's not.
Well, it's possible.
Okay.
Of course it's possible. But it's a significant added expense for Fred at a time that we're looking to control costs.
Okay.
We can get you, as a desktop exercise, a sample of where people are getting on the buses. I think we've provided that information to you in the past so that you can see the main points that people are boarding at the bus. If the county would like to lend us some people to ride the buses, we'd be happy to put together a short survey to do that kind of trip purpose and origin destination analysis.
That may be an option for us in order to find out where people are riding from and to. If they're picking up in Bowling Green for the most part and coming to Carmel Church, then maybe we'll try to find someone that's going to provide that service 5 days a week. But if I just don't believe that you're picking up a lot of people in the Ladysmith area and taking them to Carmel Church or taking them to Fredericksburg at this point in time, nor do I believe you're picking up a lot of people in Dawn and Port Royal and taking them to Fredericksburg. I truly believe the majority of the circuit is probably between Bowling Green and Carmel Church, or Bowling Green and maybe Ladysmith and back and forth. But
Well, we could give you the numbers, as Arnie said, where people are getting on the bus. We don't count where they're getting off, but where they're getting on. So we're hoping that where they get off is where they get back on to go back home. So that would give you some idea on where they're going and where they're coming. We could get those numbers for you.
Mr. Ashcraft,
For at
is it
least
something that we
less
could
than the
have
ones.
a staff member to do for a week's time or 2 weeks' time and ride on Fred and try to determine where the majority of the people are riding from and going to?
Is there enough time for that? You said December 1st was
Right.
kind of a critical day. Is there enough time for that?
Well, if we can get somebody to assist us, we could certainly put something together, a very short survey by the end of the week, and somebody could ride next week. which
But
of
they've
course is
also-
Thanksgiving week.
Right, it's also Thanksgiving week, and I don't think you're gonna get true numbers at that point. I understand what you're saying about the survey, but I think the best way to go is if you let us give you some ridership numbers, you know, on and off, I mean, on where people are getting on at different stops. I think that number would actually be truer than trying to get people riding the bus and taking a survey, especially that next week is Thanksgiving, and then the week after is December 1st.
Right.
We also have completed our budget for fiscal year 11-12, and may I assume that you would like to receive it?
Sure.
Right.
You have it now?
And understand it's predicated on providing the same amount of service that we are providing today, and it will be on the same order of magnitude as the proposed budget for fiscal year 10-11, which is 100, and this year I think it's about $105,000.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, Ms. Ashcraft, we'll keep in touch and we'll.
Yes, I'll send him the ridership numbers probably by the end of this week.
And we do meet again next week. So we might have another chance to discuss.
Other question is the fact that they've indicated that it's $48,000 is what they need to run for the remainder of this year, okay? If we agree to run it for another month, are we talking about $8,000 or $8,500 for that 1 month, and it gives us a chance to determine where the people are riding? Is that something we're talking about? So do we extend it to February the 15th, if we give you $8,000, if the board agrees to fund you $8,000? Or to March 1st or whatever?
We would have to give you the actual amount, but that sounds like about the right number.
I just did a quick, 48,000 divided by
So they
5.5
could do the
months.
survey.
It's about $8,000. I mean, that may
I
be
mean,
an option
if
that we
you
look-
want to do that and then you want to do the survey, I would suggest doing the survey
Yeah.
probably, the week after Thanksgiving or even the week after that.
That is fine, we could do that.
So that would be, so we could keep it, if we did that right now and said we're gonna give you $8,000 or next week, then you're gonna keep going for another month at least, then that keeps that same 45-day window moving out further.
Right.
Okay. All right. Again, I see a guy out here at this Gulf station early in the morning, dressed in a Petro uniform, waiting for Fred to go to work. And I know he's got a family and kids to feed, and I know another lady who takes Fred from around here into Bowling Green to go to the doctor. So I don't want to see that service stop. So I'm
Is it-
willing to do whatever we can to make it keep going.
Is it a senior citizen to go to the doctor?
No. Because there is a senior ride thing.
Oh, AAA
No.
is that?
Right, there is a senior ride from RECSB, I think, in the Rotary is doing.
Yeah, it's not I'm happily to say it's someone my age, so it's not a senior citizen. Okay?
I'm sure you gentlemen appreciate how difficult it is for Fred to operate on a year-to-year budget where we're never quite sure what that funding's gonna be, and we have to plan longer-term investments.
I understand.
For us to be operating on a month-to-month basis is not sustainable.
I understand that.
I mean, under the circumstances, I think we'd favorably respond to a marginal addition so that you have more time to look at the service and make an informed decision. But we can't operate month to month to month through the rest of this fiscal year.
I understand.
Would, Mr. Akers, would you be willing to make a motion that we at least go the extra month so we
Mr.
know we
Chairman?
get the,
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we fund Fred for one additional month in order to give us time to look at where the ridership is really taking place at, and hopefully that will not exceed $8,000 for the month. That is my motion, Mr. Chairman.
just a second.
I'll second.
Motion made, proper second, extending the Fred service for at least another month. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same. Motion carries. Thank you guys so much. Okay, next, Cynthia Green, Director of Social Services, is going to talk to us about her request. Good evening, Mrs. Green.
Good evening. In your package, you've got my amended request. The program would end basically